Thousands of years ago, long before modern cities, long before written records in many parts of the world, there were small farming communities living along a powerful and unpredictable river in East Asia. They did not call themselves Chinese. They did not know they were building one of the oldest continuous civilizations in human history. They were simply trying to survive floods, grow food, protect their families, and organize their communities. But over many centuries, these small villages would slowly transform into kingdoms, and those kingdoms would eventually become a unified empire. The story of China did not begin with a single king or a single battle. It began with geography, struggle, cooperation, and the gradual development of political power. Hello and welcome to Learning English with Nhat Lin. Today, we are going to explore the history of the formation of China. In this episode, we will focus only on how China was formed as a civilization and as a unified state. We will move step by step, from ancient legends to early dynasties, and finally to the first empire that truly united the land. We will not go deeply into culture, philosophy, or religion today. Those topics can be explored in future lessons. Our goal in this lesson is clear: to understand how scattered tribes and early river communities gradually became one of the most influential civilizations in world history. Before we can understand how China became a unified country, we must first go back to its earliest beginnings. Every civilization has stories about how it started, and China is no different. In fact, the earliest part of Chinese history is a mixture of legend and memory, passed down through generations long before clear written records existed. According to ancient tradition, Chinese civilization began with legendary rulers known as the Three Sovereigns and Five Emperors. These figures were not simply political leaders. They were described as wise culture heroes who helped early humans live better lives. Some were said to have taught people how to farm and grow crops. Others showed them how to build houses, raise animals, fish, hunt, and even how to use fire properly. These stories may not be historically proven in a scientific way, but they reveal something very important. They show that early Chinese people believed their civilization was built on knowledge, order, and leadership. Among these legendary rulers, one figure stands out above the others: the Yellow Emperor, also known as Huangdi. He is often considered the symbolic ancestor of the Chinese people, especially the Han ethnic group. Ancient stories say that he defeated rival tribal leaders and brought different tribes together under his rule. Whether he truly existed or not is still debated, but his image represents unity. Even in legend, we can already see an important idea forming: the idea that unity is stronger than division. However, legends alone cannot explain the formation of a country. To understand real historical development, we must turn to archaeology and geography. We must look at where people lived and how their environment shaped their society. And this brings us to one of the most important geographical features in Chinese history: the Yellow River. The Yellow River, also called the Huanghe, is often described as the cradle of Chinese civilization. A cradle is a small bed for a baby, and in history, this word is used to describe the birthplace of a civilization. The Yellow River carried fertile yellow soil called less, which made farming possible and productive. Early humans settled along this river because they could grow crops such as millet more easily there. When farming becomes stable, food supply increases. When food supply increases, population grows. And when population grows, society becomes more complex. But the Yellow River was not only generous, it was also dangerous. It flooded frequently and sometimes changed its path, destroying villages and farmland. Because of this, early communities had to cooperate. They needed organization and leadership to control water and protect their land. In this way, geography played a direct role in shaping political development. The need to manage floods encouraged stronger social structure and collective action. Archaeological discoveries show that as early as 5,000 years before Common Era, Neolithic cultures were already developing along the Yellow River. Two important cultures were the Yangshao culture and the Longshan culture. The Yangshao people lived in organized villages. They farmed, raised animals, and created painted pottery. Their settlements show early planning, which suggests social cooperation. Later, the Longshan culture appeared, and we can see signs of more complex society. Some settlements had walls for protection, which suggests conflict. Some graves were richer than others, which suggests social differences and hierarchy. Step by step, small farming communities were becoming structured societies. Leadership became stronger. Social classes began to appear. The foundation for early states was slowly forming. And from this foundation, the first dynasty in traditional Chinese history would soon emerge. From these early agricultural societies, Chinese historical tradition tells us that the first true dynasty appeared, the Xia dynasty. According to later historical records, the Xia began around the early second millennium before Common Era. Its most famous ruler was Yu the Great. His story is directly connected to the problem that shaped early Chinese civilization: flooding. The legend says that before Yu, many attempts were made to stop the great floods of the Yellow River, but they failed. Instead of trying to block the water, Yu chose a different strategy. He organized people to dig channels and redirect the water safely into the sea. He worked for many years, traveling across the land and helping communities control the floods. Because of his success and dedication, he gained respect and authority. Eventually, he became ruler. What makes this story important for the formation of China is not only flood control. It represents a political transformation. Before this period, leaders were often chosen because of their ability. But after Yu became ruler, power was passed to his son. This created a hereditary system, meaning power stayed within one family. This was a major shift from tribal leadership to dynastic rule. A dynasty is a line of rulers from the same family, and this system would define Chinese political structure for thousands of years. However, historians still debate the Xia dynasty. For a long time, there was no clear written evidence from that period. Some scholars believed it might have been partly legendary. In the 20th century, archaeological sites such as Erlitou were discovered, and some researchers connect these remains to the Xia period. Even though full certainty is still debated, what matters in our discussion is this. During this stage, early Chinese society was moving from simple tribal organization toward a structured state with centralized authority. After the Xia came the Shang dynasty, which began around the 16th century before Common Era. Unlike the Xia, the Shang dynasty has clear archaeological evidence. This is where early Chinese history becomes much more concrete and measurable. One of the most important discoveries from the Shang period is the oracle bones. These were pieces of turtle shells and animal bones used for divination. Priests or rulers would write questions on the bones, heat them, and interpret the cracks as answers from ancestors or spiritual forces. The reason these bones are so important is because they contain some of the earliest known forms of Chinese writing. For the first time, we have direct written records from early China. Writing is a crucial step in state formation. With writing, rulers can record events, manage resources, communicate orders, and preserve knowledge. It strengthens administration and central control. The Shang also developed advanced bronze technology. They produced weapons, tools, and ritual vessels. This shows organized labor, skilled craftsmanship, and a clear social hierarchy. During the Shang period, we can clearly see a structured political system. There was a king at the top, supported by nobles and military leaders. Society was divided into classes. Religion was closely connected to political authority, as kings claimed to communicate with ancestors. At this stage, China was not yet a single unified country, but it was already a strong and organized civilization with defined leadership and cultural continuity. The next major step in the formation process came with the Zhou dynasty, which replaced the Shang around the 11th century before Common Era. The Zhou introduced a political idea that would deeply influence Chinese history for more than 2,000 years, the mandate of heaven. According to this belief, a ruler governed because heaven gave him the right to rule. But this right was not permanent. If a ruler became cruel, unjust, or ineffective, heaven could remove its support. Natural disasters, famine, or rebellion were interpreted as signs that the ruler had lost this mandate. This idea was powerful because it explained both authority and rebellion. It justified the Zhou overthrowing the Shang, and it created a moral expectation for rulers. A king was not only powerful, he had to be responsible and virtuous. The mandate of heaven became a central concept in Chinese political thought and helped shape the idea of legitimate rule. At first, the Zhou ruled a large territory by giving land to relatives and allies. These local rulers governed their own regions but were loyal to the Zhou king. This system helped the Zhou expand, but over time, central control weakened. Local rulers became stronger and more independent. Eventually, China entered a long period of division and conflict known as the Spring and Autumn period, followed by the Warring States period. Although these periods were filled with war, they played a crucial role in the formation of China. Competition forced states to reform their governments, strengthen their armies, and improve administration. Iron weapons replaced bronze. Large-scale military organization developed. Bureaucratic systems became more efficient. In other words, division and conflict unintentionally prepared the ground for unification. After centuries of warfare, one state emerged as the strongest, the state of Qin. And with the rise of Qin, the final stage of early Chinese formation was about to begin. In the year 221 before Common Era, the ruler of the state of Qin defeated all the other rival states. After centuries of division and war, China was finally politically unified. The king of Qin declared himself Qin Shi Huang, which means the first emperor of Qin. This moment is one of the most important turning points in the formation of China. For the first time, the land was no longer a collection of competing kingdoms. It became one centralized empire. Qin Shi Huang understood that military victory alone was not enough to maintain unity. If different regions continued to use different systems, division would return. So he introduced a series of major reforms. First, he standardized the writing system. Before unification, different states used slightly different forms of Chinese characters. By creating one official writing system, communication across the empire became easier and more efficient. This strengthened cultural unity. Second, he standardized currency, weights, and measurements. Imagine trying to govern a large territory where every region uses different units for trade and construction. Standardization made economic activity smoother and allowed the central government to collect taxes more effectively. It also helped connect distant regions into one integrated system. Third, Qin Shi Huang abolished the old feudal structure that had existed under the Zhou. Instead of allowing local nobles to rule their own lands independently, he divided the empire into administrative regions. Each region was controlled by officials appointed directly by the central government. These officials could be removed if they failed in their duties. This system created strong central authority and reduced the risk of regional rebellion. The Qin government also built large infrastructure projects. Roads were constructed to connect different parts of the empire, allowing armies and officials to travel quickly. Defensive walls in the north were linked together, forming the early foundation of what would later become known as the Great Wall. These projects required enormous labor, and the Qin rule was strict and often harsh. Heavy taxes and forced labor caused suffering among the population. Because of this harsh rule, the Qin dynasty did not last long. It collapsed only a few years after the death of Qin Shi Huang. However, even though the dynasty was short, its impact was permanent. The idea of a unified, centralized Chinese empire remained. The political structure created by the Qin became the model for future dynasties. After the fall of Qin, the Han dynasty rose to power in 206 before Common Era. The Han rulers kept the centralized system, but governed in a more moderate way. They reduced harsh punishments and lowered some taxes. Stability gradually returned. Under the Han, The empire expanded its territory and strengthened its administration. A professional bureaucracy developed, meaning trained officials helped manage the state. During the Han period, trade routes began to connect China with Central Asia and beyond. This early network later became known as the Silk Road. While we will not focus on cultural exchange in this lesson, it is important to understand that a stable and unified state made long-distance trade possible. The Han dynasty lasted for several centuries, and during this time, the identity of China became stronger and more clearly defined. In fact, the majority ethnic group in China today is still called the Han people, showing how influential this period was in shaping long-term identity. If we step back and look at the entire process, we can clearly see that the formation of China was gradual and complex. It began with small farming communities along the Yellow River. Geography encouraged cooperation and organization. Legends created a sense of shared origin. Early dynasties introduced hereditary rule and political hierarchy. The Shang provided writing and clear state structure. The Zhou introduced the mandate of heaven and expanded territory, even though the land later became divided. Centuries of warfare strengthened political systems and military organization. Finally, the Qin unified the territory under one centralized authority, and the Han stabilized and strengthened that foundation. China was not created in a single moment. It was shaped over thousands of years by environment, leadership, reform, conflict, and innovation. From river villages to imperial rule, the formation of China is a story of gradual unification and state building. And that long process explains why Chinese civilization has continued for such an extended period of history. In our next lesson, we can explore another aspect of early China, whether it is philosophy, culture, or the daily lives of the people who lived during these formative centuries. For today, what matters most is understanding how the foundations were built. When we study the formation of a country, it is important to ask one final question. What does formation really mean? Does it mean the first people who lived there? Does it mean the first dynasty? Or does it mean the moment of political unification? In the case of China, formation was not a single event. It was a long historical process with several key stages. First, there was environmental formation. The Yellow River created the conditions for agriculture. Agriculture created stable communities. Stable communities required cooperation. Cooperation encouraged leadership and social structure. Without the river and the fertile soil, large-scale civilization might not have developed in the same way. Second, there was political formation. The transition from tribal leaders to hereditary dynasties marked a major shift. The Xia represented the idea of dynastic rule. The Shang demonstrated structured kingship supported by writing and military power. The Zhou introduced a moral justification for rule through the mandate of heaven. Each stage added another layer to political organization. Third, there was military and administrative formation. The long centuries of conflict during the Warring States period forced states to become more efficient. Governments developed taxation systems, standing armies, and professional officials. These innovations made large-scale unification possible. Without these reforms, the Qin state would not have been strong enough to conquer its rivals. Finally, there was institutional formation. The Qin dynasty unified writing, currency, and administration. The Han dynasty stabilized and strengthened these systems. Together, they created a model of centralized imperial government that would continue, with adjustments, for more than 2,000 years. By the end of the Han period, the essential structure of China had been established: a centralized empire, a standardized writing system, a bureaucratic government, and a shared political identity. Although many dynasties would rise and fall in the future, the basic foundation remained recognizable. So when we talk about the formation of China, we are really talking about a gradual transformation from scattered river communities into a unified imperial state. It was a process shaped by geography, legend, agriculture, warfare, political ideas, and strong leadership. It required both cooperation and conflict. It required both continuity and change. Understanding this formation helps us understand why China has such a strong sense of historical continuity. While borders changed and dynasties collapsed, the idea of a unified civilization endured. That idea began thousands of years ago, along the banks of a river that both nourished and challenged the people who lived there. Thank you for learning with me today on Learning English with Nhat Lin. In the next episode, we can continue exploring another dimension of early Chinese history. See you in the next lesson.